So, it is not controversial to say that men can't be women.
All right, everyone. So it's Friday night. I'm getting ready to go out. I'm feeling tired. But before I go out, I gotta pregame. And the only way I pregame is with an ice cold Bud Light. So good. Happy Friday.
This is Northwest Media. I am your host, Nick White. We've got a great topic to discuss here today. Today's topic is the civil war going on in the LGBT community. I'm trying to put this in simple terms. The Chinese don't like the bitches. They should shut the fuck up and not be allowed to speak.
None of this is transphobic.
Men can't be women and women can't be men. You can dress yourself up any way you like. You cannot change biology.
Meanwhile, switching gears, sales of Bud Light have dropped even more following its controversial partnership with trans activist Dylan Mulvaney.
National retail sales falling 23% over 1 year ago. That's worse than a week ago when sales were down 21%.
A load of very angry trans people who probably still live in their grandmother's basement tried to cancel J.K. Rowling. They even wanted to boycott the latest Harry Potter game, which is utterly pathetic.
To be fair, most Harry Potter games are shit anyway.
Again, here is a quote that I found online from J.K. Rowling. I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I would march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female. I do not believe it's hateful to say so. What is controversial is the media, institutions and corporations boycotting anyone who wants to keep women safe, and wokies with cheap wigs, Primark dresses and an Adam's apple shouting abuse at women for wanting to talk.
Yeah, whatever he just said.
This is another big story for us, OK? And it is in relation to Kathleen Stock, who's a professor, an author.
Professor Kathleen Stock is due to speak at Oxford University's 200-year-old debating society.
Kathleen Stock will have to walk the gauntlet of hatred today as she prepares to do a debate at Oxford.
Oxford University is like Britain's version of Stanford.
This is the same academic who had to quit her job as a lecturer at the University of Sussex after being targeted by activists for her views on gender identity. But she's faced a furious backlash from students who say her supposedly transphobic views mean she shouldn't be given a platform.
And like me and Tupac, she has a big mouth.
Let's talk about what's happening tonight. I mean, there's a documentary actually on Channel 4 tonight, which you've contributed to, Gender Wars, looking at this big sort of polarised battle. You're also speaking at the Oxford Union Society. This is the debating union at the heart of Oxford University. And you're invited to sort of a question and answer session. People can come, you know, you're going to be interviewed. I'm assuming students will get a chance to ask you questions as well. And you're very open to have that debate. But as we've often seen, over lots of different issues, but particularly over this, we've had trans organisations within the university and you know, the LGBTQ plus society saying, oh no, this is awful, she needs to be disinvited, she shouldn't be allowed a chance to speak. They were told there are going to be protesters, we've had threats. You've got the backing of the Prime Minister, you've got the backing of the university authorities to speak now. They have backed down after initially perhaps not being very supportive. Do you feel confident that you can be safe when you speak at the Oxford Union, inside the Union building and before and after?
Well, I'm confident that they've really thought about it. I should say the Oxford Union is not part of Oxford University.
Well,
it's been historically independent.
But it's a big part of the university sort of life,
it's part
isn't
of
it?
culture.
Yeah.
She's due to do a talk today at Oxford University. That's going to be taking place within the hour. We're going to be going to Oxford University, to outside, because shock horror, surprise, surprise, massive protest set to take place there.
Well, let's hear actually from that protester, Riz Posnet. She would say her pronouns are they, but I prefer to use biological reality. I'm not in any way intending any offence. I just stick to reality. Riz Posnet spoke outside the Oxford Union following being released by police. She interrupted Kathleen Stock's talk, glued herself to the floor. She was wearing a T-shirt saying "No more dead trans kids." Not sure that was helpful. She called the talk dangerous. Here's what she had to say outside the Oxford Union later.
It's not about me, where I'm just one of you all trying to protest this speech. She has a right to free speech as much as we have a right with our Article 10 and 11 rights to protest. And I exercise those rights. I'm sure you all agree with me that her speech is dangerous, is hateful, and it hurts trans people, particularly trans youth.
This is a freedom of speech issue.
Oxford University's Vice-Chancellor has defended Stock's appearance as a matter of free speech, but the university is braced for up to 1,000 protesters and counter-protesters to take action.
What's going on, the media was going on, and the protest was going on about, oh yeah, there's going to be thousands of people protesting. It's going to be one protester, and the rest were audience members to see what the fuck was going on. Not much of a protest at all. Yeah. I wouldn't listen to chicks like that until their balls are dropped. I really wouldn't. She's clearly not old enough to impress on other people her version of science. Especially when fucking biology has just probably been around since they had fucking forms to fill in at the hospital when kids were born. Yeah, you can't argue with biology. You're a man or a woman, and you're born that way, and you fucking die that way as well. Like Just Stop Oil, these trans protests are sanctioned by the government and they're funded privately, and usually run by a bunch of rich little motherfuckers who have not got to the age yet where they can even understand the fucking science they're trying to throw at people, this pseudoscience.
She will hear shouts of turf and transphobe. You can see it coming a mile off, can't you?
I mean, the Prime Minister has said you have a right to be heard. He urged students to engage with your views, even if they disagree with you. He said to the Telegraph that a vocal few must not be allowed to shut down debate. A free society requires free debate. We should all be encouraged to engage respectfully with the ideas of others. University should be an environment where debate is supported, not stifled.
These trans anarchists, not even activists, anarchists, don't really care about anybody's rights or any of this. They just want to shut down any debate that says they might be wrong. You know, it's either their way, their religion, or nothing. Everything else gets shut down.
And so, to the extent that they have power, they're going to use it to bully people into not speaking in places that they can. I'm grateful that the government have pushed through the bill, which now means universities have to ensure that free speech is respected there. It's very, very important that these people don't win, because you can see their smug faces as they do this.
Oh, yeah.
So that's absolutely fine if you find that offensive, Piers. The reality is, as much as she exercises her right to free speech, so do we. The students have consistently said, as I've mentioned before, that they don't welcome her here. And specifically, the tweet that you quoted
but that's
was me
not
responding
honouring
to
free
Kathleen
speech, is
Stock
it,
saying,
Riz? That's the opposite of free speech.
Yes,
what
it
you're
is.
doing is
free
deplatforming
speech
people
is
whose
about...
opinions you don't agree with. My argument is, I agree with a lot of what she says. I don't get it. What you're doing is you're basically,
that's
you're
fine.
basically
You're allowed to
behaving as a
agree.
group. You're behaving like a bunch of young fascists.
It's funny how some groups have more right to free speech than others. And those that are given the right to free speech more than others these days are normally the ones talking absolute fucking bollocks. It just seems to be the way it is, though, isn't it? Clown world. Fucking clown world science. Follow the clown world science.
And they enjoy the power and they enjoy exercising over people. And by the way, I've interviewed Kathleen on my show, Trigonometry. She's one of the sweetest, kindest, most generous, gentle people that you will meet. If she's hateful, then we're all hateful.
Why do you think that people who disagree with you, trans activists who don't necessarily represent the average trans person, why do you think they are so scared of both hearing what you have to say and of debating you? Because if they're so sure of their ideas and their views, why do they not want to debate you and, you know, win the argument?
Well, some trans activists do, the odd one does, but in general, I think the answer is that when trans activism took this turn about, 8 years ago to move towards self-ID and trans women are women, full stop, no debate, I think they basically tried to get there through emotional manipulation. And they don't really have arguments, because I don't really think there are that many arguments that could justify how someone could literally change their sex or some basic fact about them just by saying something. So there's not really much you can do. And so what you can do is say that the person who's disagreeing with you is a bigot and a transphobe and hates trans people and shouldn't be allowed to speak. Now, that's very effective in having a one-sided conversation, because the other person then can't participate on equal terms. So that's what has happen. That's what Stonewall's basic approach to this has been, and they are in universities, Stonewall. A lot of universities are paying Stonewall to give them advice on how to handle LGBTQ plus matters. As a lesbian, I do not feel that represents me. But so that's another part of the puzzle, the way that activist groups have got into HR departments and are basically sending out propaganda through university channels.
It would seem the corporations and the universities and shit are completely happy with people getting cancelled for having an alternative view to this new religion. It's not good.
The student union is understood to have cut ties with the debating society. So there's a huge rift now at the heart of Oxford University, and it all begs the question, how exactly are you supposed to have a debating society if you don't actually allow proper debate with people whose opinions you don't like? Well, joining me now is podcast host and comedian Constantine Kissin, Professor of Sociology at Oxford University, Dr. Michael Briggs, and Oxford student and trans rights activist Riz Posnett. Well, welcome to all of you. Riz, you're over there in Oxford. Let me start with you. You've been on the show before. I don't get this. The whole point of going to university is you're supposed to have open minds, hear views you may not like, challenge them, put your own views forward, evolve, learn. What's all this censorship about?
No, Pierce, that was the old version of universities. This is the new religion version of universities that have to include trans rights over women's rights. It's required.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, this is students exercising their own free speech, right? Like, she has been platformed by this institution. Students have consistently said, we don't think she should speak here. We don't want her here, because her views are part of a broader hate campaign and moral panic that's really damaging the lives of trans people.
Hate campaign and moral panic? Is that how you're going to attack the facts of biology? With that bullshit argument?
Here's an example of some of the protesters in action. I can't think why women would want men like this out of their spaces. Clearly, they must be evil bigots. It's the only explanation. Well, that was the conclusion of most of the Australian and New Zealand media. Newshub, a major New Zealand TV channel, decided that it would smear the Let Women Speak event as anti-trans. This is something, by the way, that both The Guardian and the Daily Mail have also done this weekend, which is a reminder that the culture war has nothing to do with left or right. That said, Newshub took it a step further, defaming Kelly J. Keane, also known as Posey Parker, as a white supremacist. In other words, rather than engage in actual journalism, they uncritically repeated the accusations of the most dishonest of Keane's critics. Great job, guys. Here's what they had to say.
Immigration New Zealand has decided to allow the controversial anti-trans campaigner known as Posey Parker into New Zealand. They reviewed her case on safety grounds after her rally in Melbourne attracted neo-Nazis.
So she's racist as well as transphobic. Hopefully not both at the same time.
Now, it is true that there were neo-Nazis at the Let Women Speak rally in Melbourne, but as the Australian Jewish Council noted, these were thugs who saw an opportunity to hijack the event for their own publicity. In fact, the neo-Nazis were clashing with Socialist Alliance, a supposedly anti-fascist group, who nonetheless seemed to be more concerned with shutting down a women's gathering than confronting, you know, the actual fascists. And yet, because these opportunistic neo-Nazi miscreants had gatecrashed the event, the Australian media conflated them with the women, claiming that they were allies. Because, of course, fascists are well known for their profound concern for women's safeguarding. Anyway, let's get back to Newshub and their incredibly sophisticated journalism.
Has issued direct threats to the Prime Minister.
I tell you what, Chris.
Using a hand signal linked to white supremacists, which we've chosen to blur.
Revoke my visa. At your peril.
Wait, what? Kelly J. Keane has previously described white supremacy and racism as having no place in a civilised society. So if she was lying about that and wanted to keep her evil views secret, why would she start making overt white power gestures with her hand? None of this makes sense until you take away the blurring effect that NewsHub have put on the clip. NewsHub would like you to believe that this is the OK symbol, which has been co-opted by certain far-right groups. But when you watch the original footage, you can see she's just adjusting the zip on her top.
Let me just tell you this. Revoke my visa at your peril.
But of course, by blurring it out, NewsHub can make it look a lot more sinister. As the commentator and podcaster Stephen Knight pointed out on his latest Substack, in that same video, Keane goes on to defend the speech rights of Maori women. As Knight puts it, that's an odd flex for someone intending to signal to their white supremacist supporters. Of course, defamation is a common tactic nowadays. People don't want to engage in discussion, so they make up lies instead. But if you're going to lie, at least make it vaguely plausible. NewsHub are openly misleading their viewers, presumably because they think their viewers are too stupid to know how to use a search engine. Well, job done. The lies have been spread, the temperature has been raised, and this is the result. So this footage is from the Let Women Speak event in Auckland, and there's also now footage circulating online of an elderly female attendee being punched at full force in the face by one of the protesters. Like all bullies, they pick on the weakest targets. The footage itself is actually too disturbing for us to show. No police were present, just a baying mob, mostly men, pushing, shoving and screaming abuse at one woman. If the stewards hadn't been so courageous, Keane could have been killed. And that, of course, is where all of this is leading.
Doesn't sound like, you know, the opposing side's got much of a fucking argument against biology. They just want to shut people down and call them fucking racist, don't they, really? But yeah, a short way of putting it is if you're an anti-trans bigot these days, likely just means you're a Christian.
So students have voted that they don't want her here in their college institutions, in the student union, and now the university have overruled that vote.
I'd really like to know who should be held accountable for the fact that we don't seem to have free speech on our campuses anymore. Again and again, we hear of people who've got views that aren't apparently acceptable to the wokedom being hounded out of university campuses, whether they are academics, whether they are speakers at the unions, big protests, threats of violence. Often they're called off. Often they are uninvited, disinvited.
The backlash they would get at the university for not letting us speak, it would have been worse than Bud Light.
I also want to clarify something here. The SU, the student union, voted to cut ties with the debating society, the Oxford Union, not over this, but over an extensive history of them bullying, harassing and just having like general bigotry, racism within their institution.
So she's racist as well as transphobic. Hopefully not both at the same time.
And this is a key thing, isn't it? I'm sure, you know, when you were at university as an undergraduate and when I was, the idea that if someone had views that you disagreed with, that you would try to stop them from speaking, that you would try and hound them out of their job, people would have thought you were mad to do it. I mean, that would have been a really strange thing. That now seems to be the norm on campus. What do you think changed?
Yeah, I think there was always controversial speakers on campuses, and I wasn't trying to hound them out because I could barely attend lectures or get out of bed, let alone get the energy to go and protest someone at the union. But yeah, I think what changed is a lot of things, a lot of anxiety being raised in the young adult population, partly through anxiety about careers and competition, partly through parents getting much more involved in universities through their children's education because the money is now a lot that they're paying for and they're worried about the future. So it's become much more like a customer base, and universities are competing with each other for students. So they are much more concerned with appeasing their customer base, trying to get good scores, exit scores when the students come out and rate them. And all of this has generated an atmosphere where universities have become really quite timid in pushing back against youthful, idealistic, illiberal attempts to shut down speech they don't like. I don't think that's probably that new. But what is different is the way that the authorities now really don't know how to handle it very well.
They give in to it, don't they? Well, often we know the academics and the university chiefs themselves agree with it.
It seems to me what's more offensive are young students who think that biological sex is a movable feast that can be denied and that the science is to be ignored and that anyone can put their hand up and say they're anything they like and they have to be respected. That I find more offensive than anything Kathleen Stock has said. You see, I have looked at what she said. She says many trans women are still males with male genitalia. Many are sexually attracted to females. They should not be in places where females undress or sleep in an unrestricted way. Self-ID threatens a secure understanding of the concept of lesbian, and so on. She stands up for the sanctity of biological sex, and I'm struggling to find out what is so offensive about all this. It's like, you tweeted this. You've got some effing nerve, Kathleen. You've brought your hatred into our community, and now you use the threats we receive because of your actions to try to garner more sympathy for your victim narrative. Oxford doesn't want your bigotry here, and will make it known. Now,
I used to describe myself as they, them too, and I had multiple personality disorder. Now I just go by that cunt over there.
I've studied the Kathleen Stock saga. I actually come from Sussex, so had a vested interest in my county and this university. What is it about her that is so hateful? What has she said or done that is actually so wicked?
Yeah, Kathleen has consistently, so what she does is she's academic front, basically, for this broader movement, which she has endorsed. She's endorsed Posey Parker, who has said horrific things that I don't think would be appropriate.
No, but hang on, I asked you, what does Kathleen Stock, what has Kathleen Stock herself said or done to warrant this treatment?
Yeah, I don't know, I understand. I don't know if you've read her book, Piers. She consistently misgenders people.
This misgendering shit and pronouns has got to go, man. It's got to go. I was supposed to look at everybody's Twitter profile before I approach them so I don't fucking misgender them. Dude, if you look like a man, I'm going to call you a fucking dude. If you look like a woman, I'm going to call you a chick. But yeah, if you look confused, I'm probably going to be confused too. Don't expect me not to misgender you if you look confused. What?
She talks about whether trans ideology should exist, whether trans people should be part of the LGBTQ community. Now, what she talks about is part of a massive campaign against trans people, and she wasn't kicked out of Warwick University. She left because she was bummed that people didn't like what she had to say.
And it's at this point that it is worth reminding ourselves of what people like Kathleen Stock actually think. I think that discussing female rights is compatible with defending these trans rights. She said, you've got male rapists in female prisons. That causes a lot of upset. You've got children transitioning, doing things to their bodies that they can't take back. That causes upset to their parents. You've got huge numbers of women unable to talk about sex-based rights in their workplaces because they feel stifled. That causes upset. It really is as simple as that.
Of course, there are the problems that you're describing are often related to the idea of gender self-identification. So it doesn't even matter whether people have transitional surgery. We had a recent case in Scotland where a double rapist identified as female and was about to be housed in a female prison. What would you make of that?
Yeah, this is happening in Canada, where I'm from. We have rapists housed with women in prison. And it's like we've all lost our minds. Have we forgotten that there are bad people in the world? There are mentally ill people in the world.
Yeah.
There's evil in the world. Of course. If you take away all safeguards for women and just say any man can identify as a woman, well, of course some men are going to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
But in the effort to appear inclusive, these politicians pass these most ridiculous laws and they take away all safeguards for women and children.
And you want people, only people, who toe the line to your worldview. And her worldview, by the way,
there's
is
a bit
shared
of a
by
delay.
the
Could you just let me know when I can
people.
come back to those points?
All right, well, let me come to the other panelists
Can I respond
first.
now?
Let me come to the other panelists.
Okay.
Constantine, this strikes me as right to the heart of the malaise at our academia, worldwide actually. This worldview, I don't like this person's views, even though they're not that controversial at all. In fact, most people would agree with them. And yet they have to be deplatformed, abused, branded bigots, blah, blah, blah. This right here is the heart of this problem.
My first guest tonight has been travelling the world to kickstart the conversation on gender ideology. Chris Elston, better known by his alter ego Billboard Chris, is a father of 2 girls, and he says children should not be indoctrinated to believe they were born in the wrong body.
Sure, so I'm sure I look utterly ridiculous, but I had no platform or means to reach people, so I had some signs made, which I wear. I'm a human billboard.
Yes.
And I know these aren't the most reputable people normally, but...
It's the sandwich board thing.
It's a sandwich board.
It normally says
thing.
things like, the end is nigh, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. They're normally preaching about the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I'm having conversations about the harm coming to kids. So the sign on my front says, children cannot consent to puberty blockers. Yeah. And the sign on my back is one little playful. It normally is one that says the definition of a dad, which is a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology.
A lot of kids are falling for this big pharma government support scam. You know, these sex change operations got to make millions for big pharma. If you see them encouraging thousands of kids to take, you know, this lane in life now, it's for a profit. It's fuck all to do with people's rights. Nothing to do with that. Big pharma's profits on the line there, and that's why these activists are pushing hard as they can, you know, let the kids be trans. So, you shouldn't be able to change your sex or make serious decisions about your life, but there should at least be very, you know, strict restrictions on what decisions you can make until you're old enough to live with the consequences of those decisions. And kids aren't old enough to say whether they should be one sex or another. It's just that simple.
What specifically is your view of gender ideology, and why do you think it is so dangerous for children?
So in a nutshell, my views are that there are 2 sexes, there are 0 genders, and there are infinite personalities.
Right.
Because that just captures all of us beautifully. There's no right way to be a boy or a girl. But this ideology teaches that just because a girl or a boy are gender nonconforming, if a girl wants to climb trees and play in the dirt and hates wearing dresses, well, guess what? She's a beautiful girl.
Yeah.
She's not a boy. She's not a trans boy. She's not anything other than what she is, which is a girl. And we need to abolish this entire ideology which teaches that stereotypes define who our kids are.
Right. So gendered stereotypes being used as the way to define what someone's gender identity is.
Right.
Where do you stand though when that gets to adulthood, when people are past the age of consent?
Look, adults can call themselves whatever they want. They can take on whatever label they want. And if they want to modify their body, that's their choice, I suppose. However, there is a caveat here. Doctors have still sworn an oath to first do no harm. And if you got some 18-year-old who comes into your gender clinic who's struggling with trauma and abuse, and there might have been sexual abuse, or maybe they have autism, or who knows what's going on in their life.
Yes.
We don't just start cutting off body parts right away. We should be treating these underlying mental health comorbidities first. And as a last case scenario, if body modification is required to alleviate this condition called gender dysphoria, well, that's a conversation for an adult to have. This should never be done with kids.
So the problem is if you have a certain identity or if you have a certain view, then you can say, I'm so vulnerable, I can't listen to any opposing views that not only can I not listen, but even the very existence of those other views being articulated somewhere, within a 5-mile radius.
Has Kathleen Stock said anything that you see which would justify this kind of treatment?
No, of course not. No.
These trans activist protests are fucking government sanctioned, privately funded, and they're usually run by little rich kids. So they're not fucking got to the age yet, but they can even understand the science, the pseudoscience they're trying to push on people.
And let me answer the question that Riz didn't answer when you asked her what Kathleen has done that is so wrong is she's blasphemed against this new religion that says trans women are women. And as you say, the vast majority of the public don't agree with that. And therefore, students have to then become little fascists, like you said, and shut this down because they can't tolerate hearing an opinion that they don't like.
Pretty much, if you don't have a working cunt, then you're not female.
Kelly J. Keane, a women's rights activist, was physically assaulted at her Let Women Speak event. She had called it Let Women Speak because she believes that women who have concerns about their sex-based rights are often silenced. And in an effort to disprove her arguments, large groups of angry men turned up to stop her from speaking.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? Dr. Briggs, you've come here from Oxford University. What is going on there? Because a lot of the academic people there now seem to be rising up against this and supporting the concept of free speech, but that's causing a rift now in the university. What's really going on?
Well, I think it's good that things have come to a head and we finally can debate about whether we could listen to the very mild, as Constantine said, the very mild views of Kathleen Stock, which really represents the majority of British people. Now, maybe not the majority of students, but even the minority of students have a right to hear, if they if they want, to hear Kathleen Stock's views. And even people who are opposed to her, like Riz, should go along and listen and just decide why exactly what they disagree with.
What I don't understand is why...
We are continually hearing that there is bad behaviour on both sides of this debate. I'm sorry, this is just not sustainable anymore. I've seen a few women's rights campaigners use abusive terms, throwing insults, and yes, behaving badly. But I've never seen women's rights campaigners sending death threats, rape threats, or attempting to punch anyone who takes an opposing view. Yet we see this all the time from trans activists. Not trans people, by the way, most of whom want to get on with their lives in peace and are extremely ill-served by these so-called allies who claim to represent them.
And the fact these trans activists use the same kind of methods, like commie methods, the Black Lives Matter and Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion. These groups all use the same tactics. You might not be blocking the roads with the trans activists, trying to stop free speech, but they still glue themselves to solid objects so they can't be moved. It's the same sort of thing as you see with Just Stop Oil. And I would suggest that the police are soft-handed with these sort of protests as well. Anarchists, activists, whatever you want to call them. Because the police don't want to be seen as being on the wrong side of this religion. It's fucking crazy.
This whole concept, when I've taken part in the Oxford Union, which I've done, and the Cambridge Union and others, I've always enjoyed it, but I've always gone there believing it was my job to try and make people come around to my way of thinking, which was an old debate. In fact, I was back at my old prep school for the first time in 50-odd years the other day, at the weekend, and I passed this old White House where the headmaster's wife used to hold debating society when I was about 7 or 8. And that we were encouraged at that age, challenge other views, listen to other views, formulate your own opinion and be unafraid to change it if you hear things which change your mind. This is all just gone out the window.
Piers, just to the point you made about when you go and when I went to the Oxford Union about trying to persuade people, think about what would be the circumstances in which you wouldn't want to persuade people and you would want to shut down people who disagree with you. The only circumstance in which you might be tempted to do that is if you know your arguments are rubbish.
And the necessity for what you do is clearly that the conversation hasn't been allowed to occur, precisely because people are saying, your words are violence, your words erase my existence. Where do you think this comes from, this hyperbolic alarmist approach to conversation?
Well, this is really all done by activists who don't want us to have a conversation because they know as soon as we have a rational, fact-based conversation about this, their whole ideology falls to pieces.
Yeah. And that is why these people are doing it.
Or if you're living in Russia, China or North Korea,
right,
where you would then call the secret police and they would come and remove the person with the offensive opinion, which was one that the government didn't agree with or whatever, and they would be taken off to some detention centre in Siberia. I mean, this is where we're heading. This is what they don't get, these students, is that once you accept that you're allowed to do this to people who have perfectly mainstream opinions, this is a slippery slope to totalitarianism, right?
Quite.
All right, Riz,
Can I respond to that?
You can respond to that. You're a totalitarian barbarian.
So you've talked about fascism as a far-right ideology about suppressing stuff. To be clear, this has been a consistent democratic decision in student institutions,
on that point,
right? Students have made this together.
On that point, do you object to being called right-wing?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I only mention that because when we invited the president of Oxford University LGBTQ+ Society to come on the programme, he replied, I think it's a he, this is Adi Harandiman. Do you know that person?
Yeah, and I'd actually like to talk about that. That person did not come on your show because they have been subject to this consistent program of hate that I've been talking about. Let me just finish this point.
Well, hang on, I'm going to finish my point.
Well, it was, because I know this person personally.
That wasn't the reason given by this person who replied, hiya, to my producer, nice to meet you. We're reluctant to work with right-wing media. So I'm not right-wing. I've never been right-wing. You're not right-wing. You object to being called right-wing. I object to being called right-wing. So we found a point of consensus.
So you're both a couple of leftists. I'm so glad you clarified that. I would never have guessed.
So the reason that other people don't want to take up interviews like this or be on platforms like this is because of the hate campaign.
Because they don't like debating, Riz.
By fans of Kathleen.
At least you have the gumption
to come on. Can I just respond to some?
You tell her, Piers. At least you had the balls to come on.
Some of those points, Piers.
Well, look, here's my point. I was paying you a compliment. You do at least come on and debate with me, right?
Yeah,
but here's my problem with the rest of your colleagues.
They don't want
to debate it because they don't want to hear someone saying something they don't like.
I'd really love to respond to that point. So you mentioned that the tweet that I said in response to Kathleen. Now, what you didn't mention is that Kathleen was responding to a tweet by Addie, who you previously mentioned, publishing a death threat that they received by one of her fans. That's why people don't want to be on platforms like this. Now, with regards to a debate, first of all, I don't believe that trans lives should be a debate, but that's not in question here anyway, because the Oxford Union wasn't trying to platform
no one's
a debate.
Debating trans.
They weren't trying to put on a debate. There weren't
Riz,
equal sides on it.
You can't just keep talking. We've had this conversation before. No one's debating trans lives.
Now, here are some words of wisdom from my next guest. A transgender 4-year-old is like a vegan cat. We all know who's making the lifestyle choices, and those words have never been more relevant, with trans activists pushing to expose children to the ideology as soon as possible.
No one's debating trans rights to fairness and equality. I've certainly never. I've only ever supported trans rights to fairness and equality. But if you're going to stand there now on television and say that you believe what's happening in women's sport, for example, is anything but grotesquely unfair and unequal, then say so, if you genuinely believe it.
I think what's grotesquely unfair and unequal is the violence and hatred that trans people are consistently facing in the media, in person, in public, and online as a result of your fans, Kathleen Stock's
Wasn't my question. Is it fair that trans athletes are now demolishing women born with female biological bodies at women's sport? Is that fair, yes or no?
This is a really boring point, but I'm happy to answer it.
Just give me a simple yes or no.
That's not happening,
you think
trans
it's
people
not happening?
should be absolutely allowed to...
OK, it's not happening. You're obviously not reading the papers, you're not watching TV, you are totally oblivious to the reality of what's happening. But
Riz, my bad, didn't realise.
OK, it's OK, no problem. Ignorance is bliss, right? Good to see you. Thank you very much.
Let's bring in Helen Joyce on this very question. Helen, thanks so much for joining us. I do want to ask you about that question. That a lot of the protesters are the kinds of activists who will say that words are violence, and that Posey Parker's very presence there is tantamount to violence. And of course, this is perhaps a means by which they can justify their own authentically violent acts.
I think they think that they can. Their activism is super linguistic, funnily, although it's backed up with physical violence. And they think that if they can silence you, they don't need to even turn up to a protest. And that has worked remarkably well over the last several years. I think what we're seeing now is that women standing up for their rights are starting to make some headway. So just the day before Posey was threatened so horribly in New Zealand, we saw World Athletics finally say that men who call themselves women are not allowed to compete in women's sports.
Because I know just for the longest time, maybe a couple of decades, pride was not offensive to people. It wasn't political, but it certainly has become political. And I think this push to expose children to this ideology has made a lot more people become hostile or at least concerned about what's happening in this space.
Yeah, I don't even necessarily see the, sort of corporate war that's happening right now with brands getting, backlash and boycotts starting like Bud Light and Target. I don't see this as a war between the LGBT community and straight people. I see it as a war between white affluent liberals who believe that corporatism is an effective vehicle to enact LGBT acceptance, despite all the evidence showing the contrary. Just like you stated, it's actually on the decline for the first time in decades. So it's between them and conservative and frankly, just normal people who are off-put by the fact that it's shoved in their faces at each and every turn, putting characters in children's TV shows with top surgery scars and, messaging children, especially like you just said, is really to the actual LGBT community's detriment. And unfortunately, so many of our allies are the main ones pushing this, counterproductive narrative that actually harms us. So they've turned us into this massive political football. And at this point, both sides are really disinterested in the actual people that's affecting and just fighting this war. And it almost has nothing to even do with us. I mean, I think of, Target and I think of all the merchandise in those stores. And I can't think of a single LGBT person that goes and buys that stuff. I'm sure a lot of white liberals buy it to make themselves feel better, make themselves feel like they're helping someone, just like how they put rainbows in their profile picture during Pride Month.
J.K. Rowling, who has never said anything transphobic in her life, is nonetheless smeared as a hateful bigot and inundated on a daily basis with death threats. She has said she received so many that she could paper the house with them. And this is the point. It isn't just one or two bad apples. This kind of behaviour is the norm in this particular activist community. If you don't believe me, you can take a look at the website turfisaslur.com, where you can see hundreds of screenshots of violent threats and imagery against women campaigning for their rights. I won't show the worst ones here, they're far too disturbing, but here are some of the milder examples. Any trans allies at Pride London right now need to step the F up and take out the TERF trash. Get in their faces, make them afraid. Debate never works, so F them up. If you're a TERF, you can get F'd with the business end of the barbed wire baseball bat. Stab a TERF today. Remember to twist the knife and then remove it. These examples go on and on and on and on.
Well, one of those white liberals that you talked about, a Twilight actress, has gone viral because she's mourned the Pride displays at Target being moved from the front of the store to the back of the store. Have a look.
Lovely swimsuits. That's where the Pride display used to be. And I came in here 2 days ago and my 7-year-old, who's non-binary, saw it and said, "Look, Mom, it's Pride. Look, they're going to celebrate me." And because some people complained and threw some stuff to the ground, or I don't know what happened, they have moved the Pride section to the back of the store.
What's your reaction to that? A mum with a non-binary 7-year-old, and we've got, other actresses like Charlize Theron, who claims her child was trans from the age of 3. What do you make of that?
So I did make a quote quite viral a couple years ago that a transgender 4-year-old is like a vegan cat. We all know who's making the lifestyle choices here. And that's the case. I mean, you see it ever so clearly with that video. It's a white liberal mother. And I hate to bring race into it, but there does seem to be, more of a fixation on this in the upper middle class white community. A lot of minority groups really aren't falling for this idea that, hormones and sex changes are appropriate at all for children. And I fall into that camp as well. This is something I've been very vocal about for very long. She's making it about her. It's these parents who do have Munchausen by proxy. It's these parents who, have a social net positive gain from having a trans child. It makes them feel special. They get to record little videos on TikTok. They get to go viral. And again, I can't help but feel like none of this is about actual LGBT people. It's about these people fighting their own ideological war, and we are caught in the middle. And again, the idea that a 7-year-old is non-binary, nonetheless trans, I mean, I don't even still know what that is. So how does a 7-year-old?
There's also the issue, isn't there, that the majority of those children who are referred to paediatric gender clinics either have an autistic element to them or grow up to be gay.
That's right.
So it goes back to your point about gender non-conformity. Why are we stigmatising that?
Right. At the Tavistock here in London, out of a sample of more than 1,000 children, 35% had moderate to severe autism. If you include the mild cases, that goes above 50%. And historically, all the studies into gender dysphoria going back decades show that more than 80% of the time, back when this just affected a handful of kids, but it was much more severe and prolonged and lasting, and it started at a young age. Even with those kids, more than 80% of the time, they simply outgrew it when they went through puberty, and a majority grew up to be gay.
Yeah.
So the cure, in almost all cases for gender dysphoria, is puberty itself, and now we block the cure.
I just thank God I grew up when being a tomboy was not an issue. No one tried to transition you or call you non-binary or think you were in the wrong body. Now, we've seen Target, Bud Light, other corporates.
Can I say one more thing about that? I actually feel that there is no such thing as a transgender child. And I say that as a transgender adult. I believe there are some children who do experience gender dysphoria, and a whole lot more now who think they are due to the internet. But those children, it dissipates through puberty or post-puberty up to 90% of the time. It's only these extreme cases where that gender dysphoria, which is a mental disorder, does not dissipate and persists into adulthood that we should really be considering transition at all. I feel like it should be completely barred for people under the age of 18 and for which that condition does not persist into adulthood. There's been studies that show that the vast majority of these kids, when they're left alone and they're left to just develop normally and naturally, that kind of fades away. And that, for me, as someone who has firsthand experience of what gender dysphoria feels like, it's very, let's just say, not fun. I don't want that for any child. So if there's a chance of it dissipating for a child, leave them alone and let it.
And our guest discovered he couldn't even give away Bud Lights for free.
Experiment here. There appear to be 3 different types of beer in this cooler. 6:45. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to come back and record this at 9:45 and show you what's left. The only beer left, Bud Light.
Which I would have thought was fairly self-evident that that's how lesbians feel.
Women don't have penises. Men don't have vaginas. Non-binary is absolute nonsense. And transitioning children is abuse.
Probably want. How do you keep your? How do you keep posure?
Wait, did you just say he came here to incite violence by forcing his opinion on people?
Yes.
You think he came here to incite violence because they got offended by his sign?
When you
What
talk
is
to
wrong
someone
with you?
and scream at someone and
He
put
didn't
your
scream
face...
at all.
Yes, he
didn't.
did.
They put their face in his face. What is wrong with you?
Okay.
How on earth did you become a police officer? She's literally sitting here saying that Billboard Chris is inciting violence by standing there with his sign. Is that really your position?
Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out the merch links in the description below.
What's controversial about that?